Star Idris Elba says learning to box as a teenager turned his life around, teaching him discipline and determination.
So in the new BBC series Idris Elba's Fight School, the actor helps a group of young people to learn to box.
Yeah, they build up all the way through.
Yep.
I've binge-watched it all till they have a contest at the end, if they get that far. Interestingly, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Justice Secretary, is really into his boxing. He's an Oxford
Dominic
Blue at boxing.
Raab.
He was boxing yesterday as he's launching some new funding, £300 million, to try and help young people to stay out of trouble and give them some discipline.
Part of their Crime Week initiative, isn't it? Yeah.
So he is clearly a keen boxer and doesn't see anything wrong with giving kids and young people the opportunity to train in the world of boxing. However, there is a different school of thought, that perhaps it does instill discipline, but also does it encourage violence? Are we putting young people at the risk of injury because we are putting them in that boxing ring? We're joined by boxing promoter Eddie Hearn, of course, who says the sport does motivate young people, and he's been very successful in that world. And Peter McCabe from the charity Headway, who says that the sport encourages violence. Eddie, you naturally, as a boxing promoter, you're going to be all about how important this sport has been, not least for the world that you move in, but also for the young people that you see coming into boxing gyms up and down the country and the difference it's made to their lives.
Yeah, I mean, as a father, particularly about the next generation, I feel like sport is so essential in terms of moulding the character and personality of young people. I think it's something that's missing, and particularly boxing. I don't think there's a better sport to instil all the things that seem to be missing from kids these days. Sometimes my own: discipline, respect, manners, you know, understanding losing, winning, and of course physical and mental health as well. So we see it. You know, I understand the argument, and I'm sure Peter will have his words, but we see it day in, day out in local boxing clubs within the community. You only have to talk to any fighter that's walked through their doors to understand how the sport has changed their life. Anthony Joshua, the most prominent of those. And they understand the dangers of the sport, but there is a distinct difference between taking children into the doors of an amateur boxing club and the elite level of the sport, which is ultimately prize fighting.
Eddie, I think everybody can understand why sport is generally a good process for youngsters to get involved in. Why particularly, and you just said there's no better than boxing, because why isn't badminton as good? Or why isn't a less, you know, impactful in a physical way sport as good? What's your argument for that?
I think boxing is very regimental. I think, you know, you look at the likes of Anthony Joshua, for example, going back to him, he talks about what it did. It gave him that sense of feeling within the community. Obviously, the fitness element, the mental health element, discipline, respect, manners, winning, losing. I just don't feel that badminton instills that within a young man or woman. Important, we talk about the female side as well. Myself and Ben were just talking about Katie Taylor against Amanda Serrano. More young girls than ever going into amateur boxing clubs now. I have 2 daughters. I now take those to the local boxing club, and it has been unbelievable for them.
And is that... someone had to box as a boy initially,
of course. Well, Katie
allowed.
Taylor used to turn up to her amateur boxing club with a head guard on and pretend that she was a boy to get through the doors.
But you know, you laugh when I said badminton, and is there something intrinsically important, is what I'm getting at, to these youngsters that might stray into a life of crime? Is there something intrinsically important about the fact that it is punching? That it has got an element of violence.
No, I mean, that's almost controlled aggression. That's actually an opportunity for them to express themselves and let out any emotion or anger within them. We have to be realistic here. We're talking about problems within communities. We're talking about gang crime. We're talking about knife crime. I can't see that anyone can have a sensible conversation where we can go into those communities and those estates and start promoting badminton. Right? We need to be realistic here about what is going to motivate and educate a young man or woman from those backgrounds.
It's a really good point, Peter, isn't it? Undoubtedly, there is a nature within the young people that you're going to be talking to, the young people that Dominic Raab's trying to appeal to when we see him boxing, whereby it's the nature of the sport of boxing that they are going to be drawn to. The aggression, the opportunity of controlled violence, the opportunity to be in a ring and actually be able to punch bags and spar with people. What are your concerns with the idea that actually that just glamorises violence and it's not the environment that these young people should be put in?
Well, the view of Headway is that boxing is a dangerous sport. And if I want to find out whether it is dangerous and risks people's health, I won't ask a boxing promoter, with all due respect to Eddie, I'll ask doctors. And if you read the report from the British Medical Association, which has looked at this at length, and medical associations around the world, they say that boxing is extremely dangerous and it should be banned. Headway looks after survivors of a brain injury. We have enough people to look after without needless injuries. And we gloss over, I think Eddie glosses over, the boxers that are killed in the ring or are left with a lifelong disability. But it's organisations like Headway that have to look after such people.
And have you seen people that have taken part in boxing that have had long-term injury from it?
I've got a photograph here of a young man who took part in an amateur boxing contest, and he's had a piece of his skull removed. He has one side of his head is flat. That's the consequences of boxing, and this isn't something that happens now and then. The other thing that irritates me,
it is something that happens now and again,
yeah,
Peter. I mean,
that irritates me is that this notion that you know, the only way for working class boys to get on is to take up boxing. As somebody who grew up on a council estate in one of the most deprived areas of the country, you know, there are so many sports that teach discipline and encourage kids to train and work and have ambition. And those sports don't involve hitting somebody, punching somebody in the head. And the ultimate way to win a boxing contest is to render your opponent senseless by repeated
that is
blows.
so naive.
That's a knockout. That's a knockout.
But that's not the aim.
That's concussion.
Fighters aren't taught
I didn't
that.
interrupt you,
No,
Eddie.
well, I'll interrupt you.
Okay.
Fighters aren't taught that. They're not taught. When it's a sweet science. This is where you're naive about the sport of boxing. It's a skill. It's about defence. It's about outmanoeuvring your opponent. You're not educated as a boxer, as a fighter, to go in and render your opponent anything.
But that's the ultimate victory in a boxing match. You knock somebody out. Please allow me to finish my point. Allow me to finish the point. The ultimate victory in a boxing match is you knock somebody out.
Not true.
And the referee counts to 10 and the person is concussed. They can't get up.
Not what you're taught by coaches.
But you can't.
OK, Peter, let me ask you this then, and we'll come back to Eddie's point on that as well and address it. But Peter, you know, why then aren't these other sports taking hold in these areas? Is it because people aren't interested? Is it because there isn't funding there? Or is it because there is something about this sport that does tap in to a certain sort of person?
I don't accept that these sports don't tap into those communities. If you look at professional footballers in the Premier League, where do they come from? What sort of communities are they largely drawn from? And, you know, they're not putting themselves at risk. And as for the issue of discipline, I have to say that if boxing teaches discipline, what happened to the baddest man on the planet, Mike Tyson, who went to prison for a very serious crime? What about amateur boxers that attack people? If your viewers want to look up a man called Frank McGarrahan, who was killed by two boxers who learnt how to harm people, and when he tried to stop them from kicking a down and out in the street, they killed him.
Peter, I just want to ask you, there are lots of sports where there are concerns of head injuries. You mentioned football, there's concerns there. There's also concerns in rugby. So, you know, if you look at the evidence, and some of the evidence in football and rugby is still quite new, you know, those sports could come under the area of banning as well.
I gave evidence to the Department of Media, Culture and Sport Health Committee on this very issue, and we are actively encouraging those sports to take steps to protect their players and their participants. But the difference is that, you know, if there is an injury in football or rugby, it's accidental. The object of the game is to get the ball in the goal.
Well, I think some people might argue in rugby, some of the big hits are not accidental. I mean, no, and equally, you know, I love my boxing. I have taken part in the charity boxing contest for sport relief. It raised a lot of money. It was part of a huge event. So I'm hugely passionate about it. But I do understand your concern. And Eddie, there has to be, the reality of this is it can be a brutal sport.
Absolutely.
People are getting into the ring, and the fans and the promoters, and it was exciting. Tyson Fury, just the other week, and I was at that fight, when he knocked out Dillian White, that was a very dramatic moment. And he did, as Peter said, he knocked him senseless.
Unconscious.
That was the end of the fight.
It wasn't unconscious.
But you can't be naive to the fact that, there is a dramatic climax to these things.
Boxing is a dangerous sport. We accept that. And I acknowledge a lot of Peter's points. One thing I will say, which is so far removed from reality, you pull up a guy like Mike Tyson in a sport that spans over hundreds and hundreds of years. Go with your own eyes into a local amateur boxing club and understand the type of people and individuals that are in there. Speak to every fighter that has walked through their doors and ask them how boxing has changed their life and where they would be without boxing. Walking through an amateur boxing club is not about trying to become a world champion.
OK, the argument against that would be that actually those people are going to be pleased because it's done good for them, and you're not necessarily talking to the people that it hasn't done good for.
Where are the opportunities? Where are the opportunities for these kids today in society?
Isn't it?
Of course, but even in the community, when you walk, if you go into a local amateur boxing club and you look at these kids and see what would they be doing without these coaches, without learning about discipline, without physically exercising, without being able to express
themselves. Then Peter might argue there should be funding for those other opportunities rather than promoting boxing.
I go the other way. I believe there should be funding for amateur boxing clubs. These clubs are run by volunteers that put themselves in the community. And politicians and local MPs have no idea. They never walk through the doors. Again, I'm talking about... I'm a father. Wait. I'm a father.
Here we go.
I'm a father. I have two
talking.
daughters. Peter, do you think I would send my two daughters through an amateur boxing club if I didn't believe in the role that it could play to show... I'm finished. And then from there we go and say, this is what boxing can you do to the community.
How many sons and daughters of neurosurgeons are participating in boxing? Why? Because they know how easy it is for people to sustain an injury.
You don't even know what happens in amateur boxing.
You're interrupting me yet again. You're interrupting.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Well, that's your view. You're entitled to your opinion. I don't interrupt you, but you constantly interrupt.
When did you last go to an amateur boxing club?
Come down to a Headway Centre.
I will. And you come to an amateur boxing club.
And I will show you people who have survived a brain injury.
I've seen it firsthand. I've been at those shows. I've been in the hospitals.
What shows?
I've seen it. I'm
talking about people with the lifelong effects, the disabilities that they will carry from boxing.
Of course.
So that proves the point, doesn't it? It's a very dangerous sport.
I agree it's a dangerous sport, but you have to...
And you're encouraging people to take part in that when they could be going to play football, they could take up athletics.
But they're not, are they?
There are so many other sports.
They're not.
They are doing it.
They're not.
Of course they are.
They're not.
Where do you think Raheem Sterling...
We're really up against time. This is one of the best ding-dongs we've had, and there's no ring.
But you've got to promise me.
You've got to come and see a Headway Centre.
But you've got to promise me. You've got to come and see these kids, because they have no opportunity.
I grew up in those communities. My father wasn't a multi-millionaire. I came from a council estate.
But you've never been through the doors.
I understand
working
class people.
But have you been through the doors?
No, I wouldn't want to.
Come through the doors.
You come and see what happens to people.
All right, why don't you both do that and we'll come along with you? Because it'd be very, very interesting to see how your thoughts are.
It's a really important debate, though. That's undoubtedly, anybody that going into a boxing club has to understand the reality of it, and it can be... I mean, you've got a big show on this weekend, of course, a show that I will be watching and millions of boxing fans will be watching. Buatsi's fighting again on the weekend. I mean, and we've got the announcement, hopefully, of AJ's fight with Usyk next week. I mean, it's not... Boxing's not getting small already, is it?
No, we've got a show in Spain straight after this show tonight, 0-2 tomorrow, Anthony Joshua. We just finished Taylor Serrano at Madison Square Garden, Canelo Alvarez. But there's two different levels that I'm talking about. That's the elite level of the sport. I'm talking about grassroots. I'm talking about moulding the future of this country.
And when I hear that a government minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, is encouraging people to take up boxing and is putting hundreds of millions of pounds into that programme, and we get a pittance, we don't get any support from government, then, like those people that have sustained a brain injury through road traffic collisions, acquired brain injury, they need help. And yet money, government money, taxpayers' money, is poured into things like boxing, and we get... It is.
There's no money.
Well, hang on, you're talking about Dominic Raab, and he is on the programme later. So we will put that point in.
Bring me back and I'll ask.
Going in to try and support young people and help them
coordinate
their crime project. We're out of time, unfortunately. Really great to get both your perspectives on this.
They've come out shaking hands.
Which is
As you
always
do
the best
after
way
a
of finish,
fight.
undoubtedly. Are we going to get the announcement about AJ Usyk next week?
Next week, you'll get it.
Early week, Monday,
Oh,
Tuesday?
no, don't put the
Don't
pressure
be
on.
promoting it.
Good to have you both here with us this morning.